A few years ago, at a leadership meeting in Switzerland, a leader asked this question: what harvest would you like to see 3 to 5 years from now? It was an arresting question, and people in the audience began to give a variety of answers. And when there was a lull, the leader asked this question: what seeds are you sowing today in light of the harvest that you want to see in the future? Whoa, that really made me stop in my tracks and think. But that is exactly the question that we need to consider when we think of the harvest of sustainable leadership. What seeds need to be sown today that will bear fruit over time? What do I need to do now as a leader that will raise up the kind of leader that I want to see 3 to 5 years from now? Some time ago in another part of the world, Latin America, in fact, I was sitting with a group of national directors, and I asked them, what's the most developmental experience you've ever had? And the energy in the room was instant. One leader after another just began to say, oh, I was given this challenge, and they spelled it out, and I felt so believed in, so affirmed. Another one said, I had this challenge. I had no support. I had no feedback. I had to figure it out, just me and the Lord. And as they went on, there was just a variety of those kinds of responses. And as I looked at the energy in the room, what was most surprising to me was the faces of the leaders who were sharing those stories, because they were reliving the experience of being affirmed, believed in, trusted, and empowered to lead in stretching challenges. That combination of identifying potential in someone and giving an opportunity to do something challenging is one of the most powerful combination of things in the lives of those leaders. And that is still true today. The seeds that were planted by leaders who believed in their people enough to give them a challenge, some feedback, and some support made a lasting difference. So for sustainable leadership, what are the seeds? I would say the first is relationship. The best leader development happens in the context of relationship, team leader, team member, in light of our mission. A leader's knowledge of his or her team members, their strengths, their weaknesses, their deficits, their aspirations, all those things combined are essential to a staff member feeling known and needed and that they have a future. Relationship implies conversation. So the kinds of conversations we talk about are where expectations are shared. What the team leader expects, what the team member expects, there's common understanding established among them. Those kinds of conversations about ministry and development goals create a shared understanding that allows the staff member to feel empowered and to begin to take faith actions. But clarity and agreement on goals isn't enough to ensure that our staff will grow in responsibility, effectiveness, or influence. The second seed is challenge. The knowledge of the person has to be combined with intentionality in the assignment of work, along with coaching, feedback, to give the kind of faith-stretching opportunity that every individual needs to grow. Dr. Bright used to say, get the cut of the person before you put him or her in position. In other words, give them a chance to show you what they're made of, what their strengths are, their weaknesses, their work ethic, their attitude, and their faith. So relationship and challenge are two of the seeds that we need to plant for a harvest 3 to 5 years from now. Fertilizer and water would be the feedback and support that the leader gives to the staff member in pursuit of those opportunities. In that group of Latin American leaders, I could see that the seeds of relationship and challenge had borne fruit. And the excitement about those opportunities was still very vivid in their minds and hearts. For many of them, it was a turning point in their leadership. Their character, their competence, and their capacity grew as a result of being entrusted with a challenge and being believed in along the way. In our movement, we've identified 5 E's to describe our approach to leadership development. It works really well in English. It might not translate really well in a number of other languages, but let me go through the E's for the sake of this message. The first one is equipping. I think this is what we think of most often when we think of leadership development. Let's get a training. Let's get people together in a room and give them something they haven't heard before. It is important, but it's not the whole package. Training is part of what we need, and it's usually where we focus on what kind of skills, abilities, and knowledge is needed to do the role that you're called to right now. The second E is experience. As the story before that I just told, almost every leader I know can point to a significant experience that shaped them as a leader, a place where they were in over their heads, where the challenge was much bigger than their current capacity, where they had to trust the Lord to do different things they had never done before. Those kinds of stretch assignments are the ones that are really helpful in growing a leader's capacity and confidence. They stretch and deepen our faith and build us into praying people so that we are dependent on the Lord for the things that He's put before us. Studies like the one done by the Center for Creative Leadership have identified experience along with feedback as one of the most powerful developmental experiences for adults. The third E is evaluation. Now, sometimes we think of this as like a formal evaluation, like a performance review. That could be possible. We can also think about assessments like Myers-Briggs or Strength Finders that give us a clue to the kind of leadership style that a person might have. We can also include spontaneous feedback. Do you catch somebody doing something well? Be specific about what you notice. That kind of feedback is so encouraging, and it enables people to kind of go forward with confidence. We also have the use of the Global 360, which can help assess a person and their readiness for a next level position. You can find that at ldhr.org. The fourth E is exposure to other leaders. I don't know about you, but there's nothing that normalizes some of the challenges that I've experienced as a leader than sitting with a group of leaders who are experiencing similar things. Our circumstances might be slightly different, but it's so encouraging to hear how others are trusting the Lord and the creative ideas that the Lord gave them to pursue those opportunities. Together as a community, younger leaders can understand the kinds of things that each other are experiencing. And there's something about senior leaders sharing their stories that takes the mystery out of leadership. A lot of times we'll look at leaders and we think, oh, they are just wired that way. And until you hear their journey, you don't realize that they had the same mountains to climb, the same valleys to cross that you and I do. So exposure to other leaders is a critical ingredient to a leadership development approach. The last one, and probably the most challenging to create, is environment. And that is creating the atmosphere where every leader is thinking intentionally about the development of their people toward the fulfillment of their God-given potential and toward the role that they might play in our movement. That means instead of going to the person that is the most capable, who has done that same job for 15 years at a conference, it's looking for who is the next person that you can pair with them that can gain that experience. I can't remember how many conversations I had with leaders when I was a young staff who would just look at me, their head would turn a little bit and they say, you should have this kind of assignment next. whether it was the type of campus or a summer project that I could be a part of or that I could lead. They were always thinking about what next steps might improve my growth and capacity as a leader. So 5 E's: equipping, experience, evaluation, formal or informal, exposure to other leaders, and environment. These 5 E's that represent the seeds of leadership development as well are lived out in 2 processes in our movement. And the first one is what I would call an all play. That is, every team leader and every staff member on every team at every level. This should be happening all over the place with no apology. We want to be in intentional conversations between every team leader and every staff member. We've called this the staff development cycle. Some parts of the ministry call it the development cycle. Some places call it the personal development review. Whatever the name of it is, the principle is that the team leader has a series of intentional conversations with each staff member to establish clear objectives and individual development goals. How are they a part of the strategic plan? And what would it look like if this person was successful in taking on this part of the plan? Are there any things that that person needs to know that the team leader is expecting, but they might not be able to guess it? That kind of conversation is just gold when it comes to seeing people feel empowered and confident about the work that they're entrusted to do. The staff development cycle has 3 parts. The first is a focus conversation that establishes the ministry objectives and development goals. If you've been doing this for a few years, we might call it the refocus conversation. Some of the goals might be the same, some of them might be new, but we're sort of turning the lens so that we get it right in focus of what that person's responsible for this year. There's 2 formal conversations that come in the annual cycle, a mid-year and end-of-year review. The mid-year is the opportunity to make any adjustments about what those goals are. I don't know about you, but sometimes we have, more aspirations than we have energy, or circumstances change and we can't fulfill the goals that have been established early on. So this is the place where you want to make those adjustments and see if the person has what they need in order to move forward well. The end of year review is the place where progress is celebrated. We can look at what's been accomplished and give a yay. Well, maybe a little more than that in some cases. But we also want to document what's happened so we have a history of the person's leadership and a record of their ministry progress. It's helpful when we begin to look at leadership development further on. That staff development cycle, it's always been one of the things that surprised me. I had a couple of very senior staff members on my team who, every time we finished one of those conversations, they would just get up and go, "Oh, I feel so empowered right now." And I would just look at them and I think, you guys are smart. You know what to do. And finally one day I asked, "What is it about this conversation that does that for you?" And they said, "Because we are on the same page. You and I have the same understanding, so I feel like I can move forward with confidence." It surprised me, but I think everybody wants their work to matter. Everybody wants their work to be known, and everybody wants to know that they're on the right track. And that is what those kinds of conversations can do for our staff. That end of year conversation is also the place, along with feedback and appreciation, of where we can begin to talk about future aspirations. Where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? What would you like to be doing? It's the place where the team leader can actually interject, if that is what you're thinking about for the future, here are some things that would be helpful for you to grow in or to gain experience in. It creates that sense of not only are you known and needed, but you have a future and somebody is thinking along those lines. The second key process is really for the national leadership team. It is the connection between the strategic plan and your people capacity. Sometimes we'll talk about this as a leadership pipeline process. But if you sit down and do a strategic plan, you're thinking and you're praying, Lord, where do you want us to go? Where are the next places that we need to place teams? Where are the next leaders coming from that we need? And so that forward-thinking direction also has an implication on your people resources. What kind of leaders will you need to see that strategic plan realized? How many? Of what types? What kind of experience would they need? Who do we have? If we don't have enough, where do we go? What do we look for? These are all the questions that are part of national leadership teams' responsibility to think about how to fulfill the mission in their country. For a strategic plan to become reality, two things are needed: people and funding. Today I'm going to talk about the people side. So when you look at a map of your country, how much of that country has access to the gospel right now? What has God prompted you to take action on? Where is expansion most needed? And who are the people that could possibly take on that work? These are the strategic questions that leaders need to think about when they're thinking about sustainable leadership. I was visiting a leadership team in the Midwest some time ago, and part of their responsibility was to get to every campus in their region, and they had hundreds that they needed to do. So I asked them the question, how are you thinking about getting to these other campuses? And to my great surprise, they pulled out a sheet of paper, well, several sheets of paper, because we were still doing paper in those days, with a list of every campus in the region in order of priority to where they would place staff next. I was impressed. They had done some really hard work. They looked at every campus and determined that there were three critical factors that they wanted to consider: the size of the student population, the influence of the students upon graduation, and the sending history of the campus. And they were able to prioritize a list sequentially for where they would place staff next. What made it even more impressive was that after they showed me the campus list, they pulled out another sheet of paper with all their potential leaders listed, potential matchups for the campuses where their strengths and abilities would be best focused. And it was simply a matter of them staying in touch with those staff members, with their team leaders, to keep track of their readiness for those assignments. Now, it didn't work out like magic. That can sound like, oh, it would have been so easy. People are people, and they also have aspirations. So sometimes the matchup wasn't quite what the person was looking for, or the team wasn't ready for that person to leave that campus yet. But they had done the strategic work of identifying their priorities and looking at the leaders that they had. This is the essence of the leadership pipeline process and a great example of it. A similar story was told to me by one of my team members as he was visiting Francophone Africa. He and the LDHR leader there were visiting a national team. And as they talked about their strategic plan, they asked the question, where do you want to go next? They happened to be sitting in a room with a big map of the country. All of the ministry locations were currently marked. And as the team looked at the map, they realized all of the locations were in the south of the country, and the missional gap was in the north, and that's where they needed to go. So they began that conversation about, if we want to go north, where would we go first, and who might be able to do that kind of work. Wherever you are in the world, the principle is the same, of looking at where does God want us to go, and who has He given us that could possibly be sent there. Every country will need to determine the way to do that. The basic tools can be found at ldhr.org. The leadership pipeline process connects our intent of pioneering into the missional gaps with sustainable leadership. Clearly, we have to trust the Lord for where He wants us to go. We can't do it without Him. We would expect that every national leader, whether you're the national team leader, national SLM, or leader strategies, or ops, or LDHR, that every national leader has leaders in preparation for their role. It's the right thing to do, to be ready. We're not guaranteed how long we're in these roles or what it might look like for the future, what God might have for any one of us in the future. So getting ready, getting the next generation ready is super important to our mission. Okay, so these two processes, the staff development cycle, focus, mid-year, end of year, that's an ongoing cycle. And when it is done well, it empowers a leader to take steps of faith. It gives the freedom that we're talking about with new mindsets while establishing the sort of riverbanks that that leader can operate within. That's essential. This is every team leader, no matter where you are. So even on our global executive team, we are all involved in the staff development cycle with our president. I do it with all the members on my team, and we're doing it on all the VP teams. It's one of the things we want to see throughout the movement. The leadership pipeline process starts with, where is God calling us to go? We need to have direction, and then begin to think about our people. What's the implication of that direction? What kinds of leaders do we need? What numbers of them do we need? This would include both succession planning and expansion, strategic expansion. It could involve replacement of current leaders who are moving on to new assignments. Whatever the form is, these are the kind of questions that national leaders and global leaders should be thinking about. Once we get to who are they, we want to assess their abilities. In other words, if they were going to take on a next level role, what kinds of growth or development would be necessary? What kinds of assignments could it give this person to help prepare them for potential roles in the future? Experience and development. And then we come back around here and say, let's deploy those leaders towards this direction. This cycle, the staff development cycle, I call it the bread and butter development strategy because we do it everywhere. It helps every staff ensure that they are growing and effective. It also helps us identify those who have potential beyond their current assignment. You can begin to see the change in the thinking and stuff like that. It sort of just rises in the course of a team, and you can see who maybe the next potential team leader could be, whether it's for that team or for another team somewhere else. That information feeds into this process, this national process. So as local teams are doing this, the leaders who are being identified as potential show up here as people that we want to keep an eye on in terms of their readiness for new assignments. Let's assess, develop, and give them key opportunities, and then give them the kind of challenge that could enable them to fly. This development, when somebody has that kind of potential, can come over here back into the staff development cycle and result in some work that is given that person either on behalf of the national ministry or on the local ministry, again, to get the cut of the person. Like, what are their strengths? Where are they in terms of their readiness for something new? Okay, these two processes work hand in hand. I really believe that if we're doing the staff development cycle well, every team leader with every team member, that we'll have staff who feel known and needed and who are willing to step into new assignments because of that affirmation and confidence that has been built over time. Leaders who are living out the staff development cycle are sowing the seeds for a future harvest of sustainable leadership. Well executed, this is both a relational and strategic process. It helps us live out our core value of growth. What is modeled at the team leader is often repeated when those team members become new team leaders. So when we do this well, we're able to shape the future culture of our ministry by being good models. In our leadership pipeline process, leaders prayerfully consider God's direction for the national ministry and begin to think about the people implications of those choices. It is the time when leaders can sensitively engage potential leaders about where they would like to serve next. We can give the kinds of challenges that help stretch people in their faith, in their competency, in their confidence. This process helps us live out our values of faith, to take a new step forward, and fruitfulness, to be pruned, shaped, and becoming more fruitful as we trust the Lord. This is the harvest then that will plant new seeds for the future. Just like when you move a crop, and the plant goes to seed, you see the new crop come up a lot of times just on its own. This is my hope and my prayer. So let's plant the seeds of relationship and challenge. Let's water and fertilize those seeds. Whether you call it the development cycle or not, those are the things that are needed: relationship, challenge, feedback, and support. Let's pay attention to our flocks, as Proverb instructs us. I trust that the Lord will give us a harvest when it is ready. So may the Lord guide you as you lead. May He give you the ability to sow the seeds and plant and water them. And may He bring to you, your country, your leadership, the harvest of sustainable leadership that we're all anticipating, to His glory and the fulfillment of the Great Commission.